Hello, welcome back to Learnovative Agile and Scrum video series. My name is Vijay Bandaru. I am a certified Scrum trainer, certified team coach, and certified enterprise coach from Scrum Alliance. We create these videos to help you understand the concepts of Scrum in an easy manner so that you can implement them well and effectively, confidently in your products and projects. So in this video, we're going to discuss about the Scrum artifacts relationship. There are 3 artifacts in Scrum: product backlog, sprint backlog, and increment. And what are the commitments for these artifacts? And deep dive into the product backlog, the first artifact of Scrum, product backlog. These are the 3 concepts we are going to discuss in this video. So let's start with the artifacts relationship. As we discussed, there are 3 artifacts in Scrum: product backlog, sprint backlog, and increment. These are interconnected. How these are interconnected? Some of the topmost items of the product backlog will be pulled into the sprint backlog during the sprint planning based on the priority decided by the product owner. So how much work can be pulled into the sprint backlog will be decided by the developers in collaboration with product owner and Scrum Master. So throughout the sprint, any item within the sprint backlog that satisfies the definition of done will be eligible to become part of the increment. By the end of the sprint, if any item in the sprint backlog does not meet the definition of done, which means does not satisfy the definition of done, which is again taken back to the product backlog according to the priority decided by the product owner. On the last day of the sprint, you will take this increment to the sprint review. And whatever feedback you are getting from the stakeholders, and also throughout the sprint, whatever product owner wants to improve the features of the current sprint, that feedback again will be mapped into the product backlog according to the priority. That means you can consider the orange line as the planned work for the sprint. Green line is done work, which means meeting the definition of done. Red line is undone work, which means not satisfy the definition of done. Blue line is feedback on done work. Which may be coming from product owner or the stakeholders. The primary purpose of these artifacts is to enhance transparency. Meaning of transparency is creating shared understanding across the Scrum team members, product owners, Scrum Master, and developers, and also stakeholders. So the primary purpose of these artifacts is to create a shared understanding within the Scrum team. And the first 2 artifacts, which are product backlog and sprint backlog, represents the work done by Scrum team, whereas the increment represents the value that you are creating for the stakeholders, customers, or users. Scrum also created for each of these artifacts a commitment. The product backlog commitment is product goal, which means any item that should be part of the product backlog, it should be in line with the product goal, and it should help to support or meeting the product goal. Similarly, sprint backlog commitment is sprint goal, which means any item that is to be part of the sprint backlog should be in line with sprint goal, and it should help to support meeting the sprint goal. And there's obviously a dotted line relationship from sprint goal to product goal, which means multiple sprint goals will eventually help you to achieve the product goal. And the commitment for increment is the definition of done, which means any item within the sprint backlog, if it has to become part of the increment, it should satisfy the definition of done. If it is not, then it will be taken back to product backlog. That is how the quality of the increment is maintained throughout. So these are the artifacts, relationship and artifact commitments in Scrum. Now let's deep dive into understanding the characteristics of the product backlog. First of all, why is it called as a backlog? The meaning of backlog is something incomplete or yet to be done or pending to be completed. So anything for the product and by the product which is incomplete or pending is maintained in the product backlog. So product backlog is created and managed and owned by the product owner. You can consider a product backlog is like a container which contains the PBIs. The full form of PBI is product backlog item. So the product backlog has certain characteristics. I created a small acronym so that you can easily remember. Optimized. O stands for ordered, which means all the items, at least the topmost items, will have certain sequence number, which is called order. Product owner will decide the order. Scrum does not give you any tools or techniques or formulas to decide the order because Scrum is a framework. But usual general industry practice is high value items will be given higher order. That means higher business value items will be put on the higher order of the product backlog. But sometimes there may be a scenario that more than one item can have same business value. So in that case, the product owner will check for out of all those items which are having same business value that contains low cost of implementation will take the precedence. Also, high risk items will be given higher order because it helps you to fail fast, fail safe. The meaning of fail fast, fail safe is if you keep a risky item on the top of the product backlog, in the product timeline, it will come to early sprints. But if you try to push the item, risky item, towards the bottom of the product backlog, in the product timeline, it will come to the late sprint. So in general, it is good to tackle a risky item early in the game so that you will have enough time to tackle the risk effectively. Now coming to the risk, type of risk. So how many, what kind of risks you may have? So there may be different risks you can consider. For example, you can categorize the risks into business risk and technical risk. So the person who has to handle the business risk is obviously the product owner. The business risk can be anything related to market or finance risk or regulatory or anything related to the business of the product. And the technical risk are taken care by the developers. So anything related to architecture or infrastructure or anything. So generally, there will be a continuous collaboration between developers and the product owner through various interactions like backlog refinement or sprint planning or sometimes story writing workshop, which is not part of the Scrum, or release planning, that is also not part of Scrum. So during these discussions, they will exchange the information and then take care of that. Generally, risks will have different categories or attributes. So you can consider for risk, there may be a probability. Probability means how likely that risk will occur. That is called probability. And the second attribute is called impact. Impact means if that risk occurs, what will be the impact on the product or project parameters like scope or cost or time or quality or time to market, anything. So let's understand this with a simple example. We will consider, for the sake of simple understanding, we will consider low or high for probability. Similarly, impact also low or high, just for the sake of understanding this. Let's say you are walking on a road. The road is like this. There is a small hole on the road. The hole depth is like less than a feet, like maybe 6 to 8 inches. Width also not so much. So for you to fall into the hole, low probability, and even for some reason if you fell into that hole, less impact. So let's take a different scenario. You are walking on the road. The hole is like this. The depth of the hole is like 3 to 4 feet. Sorry, width is 3 to 4 feet, but the depth is like 6 to 8 inches, very small depth. But width is 3 to 4 feet. So for you to fall into that high probability, even if you fell into that hole, it is low because the depth is not so high. So another example is you are walking on the road and the hole is like this. The depth is like 6 to 8 feet, but the width is less than a feet. So in this case, your probability of falling into this is low, but if you fell into the hole, you may get a leg fracture. So high, low probability, but high risk. In another case, let's say you're walking on the road. The hole is like this. It's a very deep hole, and also width is also high, and you see some kind of sharp items like rocks inside that. So obviously high probability and also high risk. So like that, for every back risk, the product owner and the developers and if required stakeholders can collaborate, decide the information. So obviously the value information is coming from the stakeholders. Product owner will interact with the stakeholders. Cost information is coming from developers in terms of the estimations. And the risk information is coming from either product owner or developers, depending upon what we discussed, business risk or technical risk. So this is the information captured by the product owner time to time, and accordingly using that, deciding the order. That's what is called ordered. Now coming to the P stands for progressively elaborated. The meaning of the word elaborated is explained or detailed. Progressively means the more you go into the product. In general, the topmost items of the product backlog are more detailed and more granular. That means small in size compared to bottommost items. The reason is you will be pulling items from the top of the product backlog into the sprint backlog. So if those items on the top of the product backlog, which are pulling into the sprint backlog, are not detailed enough and granular enough, they cannot be completed in a sprint. So the value may not, the expected value may not be delivered. And for every clarification, they have to go back to the product owner, which will slow down the product development. That is why the items in the top of the product backlog are more granular and more detailed than the bottom items. Then you may ask a question, how about the bottom items? When do they get granular and adding the details? So when you move some of these items from the top into the sprint backlog, this place will become empty. So naturally, according to the order, these items will start popping up into the top. So while they are coming up into the top, using the product backlog refinement, you will add the required details, make them into the smaller by using some splitting techniques. You will continuously add the details. That is what is called progressively elaborated, which is also called as emergent. Now T stands for transparent. Transparent means creating shared understanding, having everybody in the Scrum team having shared understanding. If not all the items in the product backlog, at least the top few items which are most important probable candidates for the next upcoming 2 to 3 sprints. It is the responsibility of the product owner to ensure the items of the product backlog basically is transparent, visible, and understood. Now, the product backlog includes all the work required to improve the product and its value. So, which means new features, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, changes to the existing features, infrastructural items, production defects, anything that will help you to improve the product and its value is eligible to become part of the product backlog, which means product backlog is managed by product owner. So there are certain activities that the product owner will do as part of effective product backlog management, which includes developing and communicating the product goal so that everybody will understand, and creating and clearly communicating the product backlog items, and ordering the product backlog items, ensuring that the product backlog is visible, transparent, and understood. These are the activities called as backlog management activities, which is responsibility and accountability of the product owner. The product backlog is incomplete. The reason for incompleteness is when you are working in a complex environment. Complex means unknown is more than known. It is very difficult to get all the information in terms of the requirements in the day one itself. So you start with what you know, and based on this nature of iterative and incremental product delivery, you continuously getting feedback, and so that you may add new items to the product backlog as and when it is required, or you may change the existing items. So that is why product backlog is incomplete. And product backlog is single source of requirement for the Scrum team. There may be multiple people giving the requirements, but the product owner will put them into one container called product backlog and keep on prioritizing based on these things. E stands for estimated. Product backlog items are estimated. The developers will estimate the product backlog items. So the first opportunity for the estimation is product backlog refinement. If they miss, the next opportunity is sprint planning. I recommend to, as much as possible, to estimate the product backlog items in the product backlog refinement by talking to the product owner, get all the clarifications done, and then if the item is too big, make it into smaller granular item, discuss the acceptance criteria, identify the dependencies, and then estimate in the backlog refinement. If some clarifications are pending and product owner wants a couple of days to check with the stakeholders to get those clarifications, in that case, it is okay to estimate in the sprint planning. But my recommendation and preference would be to estimate as much as possible in the backlog refinement. And another characteristic of product backlog is dynamic. Dynamic means living artifact. The product backlog undergoes something or the other changes. Maybe new items added, existing items are modified or reordered or updated or removed unwanted items. That is what is called dynamic nature. So as long as the product development is happening, the product backlog may go through some changes. That is why product backlog is not static, it's dynamic. Now coming to the individual backlog items, which we refer to as product backlog items. The full form is product backlog items. They have certain attributes. If not all the items all the time, at least the topmost items will have these attributes. Another acronym we can see here, DOS. D stands for description. This description may be in terms of acceptance criteria, or user interface mockups, error messages, confirmation messages, dependency information, alert messages, all these things. Product owner will be providing the description based on the interactions with the stakeholders. O stands for order. This order is also decided by the product owner. Usually based on these three parameters or any other parameters like the dependency of the item on a different item. So any other parameters also possible. This is not a single approach to decide the order of the backlog items, but this is a proven in general practice to decide the order or create the order of the backlog items using the high value, low cost and high risk items. After this, you can consider anything else also. And S stands for size. Size in terms of estimation. So developers will provide the size information to the backlog items. How do they do that? This description of each backlog item will help the developers to understand the exact functionality of the backlog item which needs to be implemented. That knowledge will help them to see what are all the things they have to do as part of front-end validations, coding, testing, regression, any external APIs they have to call, database work, all these things, which will help them to understand the volume of work, complexity, and uncertainty involved in the backlog item, and then accordingly, they will provide the estimation. So that's what is a brief explanation about the product backlog. We discussed the artifact relationship, how the product backlog, sprint backlog, and increment are interconnected. We discussed the commitments of the artifacts. Product backlog commitment is product goal. Sprint backlog commitment is sprint goal. Increment commitment is definition of done. And we have discussed the characteristics of this product backlog. Optimized, it's a small acronym you can easily remember, and how you can decide the order. We also have discussed about the different risks and who owns which type of risk and risk attributes, and then a couple of examples how to decide that. And the attributes of backlog items, which is DOS, description, order, and size, who will provide which information, all these things. I hope you have liked this video. Please share and like, subscribe to our channel. And in case you are looking for any public or private Agile, Scrum, and Safe related training inquiries, feel free to contact us using this information. We'll be happy to help. Thank you very much. Have a nice time.